We all have our favorite Hollywood stars, especially from the golden ages when entertainment was born. The stars that fill us with nostalgia and giddy excitement. They were the faces of Hollywood and will forever be in our hearts. But these famous icons had their secrets that they thought would follow them to the grave. Dorothy Dandridge, daddy issues. Describing Dorothy Dandridge as destined for stardom seems natural. Her mother, Ruby, was a renowned actress and performer. Yet, despite her legacy, fate seemed to conspire against her from the outset, and deep down within her, she held some terrible insecurities that shaped her life. Sadly, most of them had to do with relationships and the roles she played in them. For the most part, some who know her story argue that the foundation of her relationship problems began with her father and the trauma that he caused in her life. While the arrival of a child typically brings joy, Ruby Dandridge welcomed Dorothy into the world during a challenging time. Having separated from Dorothy's father just 5 months prior, Ruby found herself navigating single motherhood with her older daughter, Vivian, in tow, all while striving to carve out a career in showbiz. Dorothy had to grow up without a father or a father figure in her life, and soon enough, her insecurities began to show. Her whirlwind of love, romance, and relationships began when Dorothy found herself deeply in love with a man named Harold Nicholas. In her mind, their love would last forever, and she would grow old with him. However, that was not the case, as soon enough she was faced with the first and perhaps the most painful heartbreak of her entire life. As a result of her demanding career and a lot of other factors, the relationship between the two lovebirds began to grow sour, and little by little, Harold grew tired of the relationship. Soon enough, they were at a crossroads, and Harold had to bid Dorothy goodbye. To them, that was the end of their love story. But little did they know that fate had other plans for them. After the breakup, Dorothy and her sister traveled to do a European tour. It was going to be a good way for Dorothy to plunge back into her career and perhaps try to forget about Harold. But oddly enough, the timing for the tour couldn't be more wrong. The Dandridge sisters found themselves in London amidst the Blitz. Seeking refuge alongside countless others during nights filled with chaos and fear. Forced to truncate their tour, they hastily returned to the safety of the United States, where Dorothy was joyfully reunited with Harold Nicholas. It seemed like their relationship was meant to be, and fate had brought them back. But again, fate wasn't quite done with them. The two lovebirds eventually decided to get married, and for Dorothy, this was a dream come true. Nothing could come between them now. But as time went on, while the marriage seemed dreamy from the outside, behind the curtains, it was a nightmare. It all started with Harold treating Dorothy coldly. The man she loved seemed like he wasn't there anymore, and she tried to do what she could to rekindle their love. But sadly, it got worse. Then Harold's eyes began to wander towards other women, and the first cases of infidelity rose its ugly head, leaving Dorothy both confused and devastated. What had gone wrong? Now this is where it gets dark, because all of these began to have a terrible effect on Dorothy. Had Harold not been Dorothy's first love, perhaps she would have found the strength to end their relationship. Instead, she internalized his mistreatment, attributing it to her own perceived shortcomings and lack of experience. Despite their struggles, they persevered through the first year of marriage, offering a glimmer of hope for reconciliation. However, their recurring issues resurfaced, dashing any fleeting optimism for a lasting resolution. All through, Dorothy beat herself up. As the coldness in her marriage got worse, she blamed herself. She endured her husband's abuse, hoping that things would get better, but sadly, things were about to get even worse. Early in 1943, Dorothy Dandridge found out that she was pregnant. She prepared for the new addition to their family and hoped that it would bring her and Harold Nicholas closer together. Sadly, she was in for a brutal surprise. When the time came for her to give birth, she wanted Harold to be at her side, but he was nowhere to be found. As the marriage eventually came to an end, Dorothy considered herself the cause and did all she could to make her next relationship better. But for some reason, she seemed to have a hard time with love, as all the men she fell in love with eventually did, just as Harold did, leaving her to blame herself further, a secret she tried to keep within herself for as long as she lived. Josephine Baker, famous actor, secret spy. Back in the early days of her career, Baker was not to be messed with. She was the star of the show at the Folies Bergère in Paris, where everyone couldn't get enough of her. People went wild for her performance in the 1927 revue called Un Vent de Folie. But what made it so special? Well, it was her outfit. She would wear a short skirt and a fancy necklace. Her style made her even more famous and intriguing, and she was a symbol of how fun the Jazz Age and the Roaring Twenties were. Looking at all these, it is almost inconceivable to realize that when the Second World War arrived, Baker worked as a spy. In September 1939, when France decided to do something about Germany's invasion of Poland and declared war, Josephine Baker stepped up in a big way. She joined forces with the Deuxième Bureau, which is like the French version of James Bond's crew. They called her an honorable correspondent, and she teamed up with Jacques Abdy, the big boss of French spying in Paris. Baker had a secret mission, to cozy up to the Germans while pretending to be their friend. She hung out with them at fancy places like embassies and nightclubs, all the while gathering important info. Thanks to her fame, she got to mingle with top folks from all over, even chatting with high-ranking Japanese, Italian, and Vichy French officials. She'd then pass on what she heard to Abdi. When the Germans invaded France, Baker didn't stick around Paris. She hightailed it to her home in the south of France, the Château de Milande. There, she helped out people who wanted to support the good guys, the Free French led by Charles de Gaulle. Plus, she kept her eyes and ears open, picking up tidbits of intel at fancy gatherings, and even writing secret messages on her sheet music. But that was not all. 1941, Baker took her show on the road to North Africa, claiming it was for her health, but really to keep helping the resistance. She toured around, meeting important people and gathering info, even hiding notes in her undies to avoid getting caught. She faced some tough times, like a bad infection that landed her in the hospital, but she bounced back and kept entertaining troops from Britain, France, and the USA. After the war, France said a big thank you to Baker. They gave her medals for her bravery and named her a Chevalier of the Légion d'honneur, a super fancy honor from General Charles de Gaulle himself. And after the war, you would not have known that Baker had been going on secret missions as a spy. She hid it so well and went back to her normal life, finding love and getting married. Even though her marriage didn't last very long, she settled for adopting more children, 11 kids in all. Her legacy is one of bravery to be admired and emulated. Edward Robinson. Affiliations with mafia groups? Edward G. Robinson, born Emanuel Goldenberg on December 12, 1893, in Bucharest, Romania, was a prolific actor renowned for his portrayals of gangsters and tough guys on screen. Robinson's early life saw his family immigrate to the United States, settling in New York City's Lower East Side. It was here that Robinson developed a passion for acting and eventually pursued a career in theater. Robinson's breakthrough came with his role as Enrico Bandello in the 1931 film Little Caesar. His electrifying performance as a ruthless mobster catapulted him to stardom and established him as one of Hollywood's leading actors. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, Robinson continued to solidify his reputation with memorable performances in films like Scarface, 1932, Key Largo, 1948, and Double Indemnity, 1944. However, it was not just his on-screen persona that captured the public's imagination. Robinson's associations with known members of the mafia added an intriguing layer to his celebrity status. His friendships with figures such as Johnny Roselli and Mickey Cohen fueled speculation about his potential ties to organized crime. In particular, Robinson's portrayal of gangsters in films like Little Caesar and Key Largo blurred the lines between fiction and reality, leading some to question whether his characters were inspired by real-life connections. Despite never being formally implicated in any criminal activity, Robinson's association with known mafia members and his immersion in the world of organized crime figures continued to spark intrigue among fans and the media alike. Robinson's career spanned over 5 decades, earning him numerous accolades, including an honorary Academy Award in 1973 for his contributions to the film industry. Despite his enduring legacy as one of Hollywood's most iconic actors, Robinson's ties to the mafia remain a subject of fascination and speculation among film historians and enthusiasts. Robert Blake, an alleged murderer. On the evening of May 4, 2001, Robert Blake and his wife Bonnie Lee Backley dined at Vitello's, a popular restaurant in Los Angeles' Studio City neighborhood. As they finished their meal, Blake realized he had left his gun, which he was licensed to carry, at their table. He informed Backley and proceeded back into the restaurant alone to retrieve the weapon, leaving her waiting in their car. Upon returning to the car, Blake was met with a harrowing scene. Backley sat in the passenger seat, gravely wounded by 2 gunshot wounds. Frantically, Blake sought help from nearby residents, banging on doors until Sean Stanek answered his plea and called 911.
911, what's your emergency?
Stanek later recounted the horrifying sight of a massive amount of blood everywhere inside the vehicle. Despite efforts to save her, Backley succumbed to her injuries after being transported to a nearby hospital. In the aftermath of the tragedy, conflicting accounts emerged regarding the events leading up to Backley's death. While Blake claimed he had left the gun in the restaurant and returned to find Backley injured, a busboy at Vitello's contradicted this narrative. The busboy informed police that he had cleared the couple's table before Blake returned and found no firearm present. 10 days following the shooting, police made a significant discovery. A Walther pistol, described as a collector's item, was recovered from a trash bin located a block and a half away from the crime scene. Ballistic analysis revealed that the bullets retrieved from Backley's body matched those fired from the gun. However, the serial number had been deliberately filed off, rendering it impossible to trace the firearm's ownership. On April 18, 2002, the Los Angeles Police Department announced a major development in the case. Robert Blake was arrested for Backley's murder, with investigators citing compelling and conclusive evidence linking him to the crime. Additionally, Blake faced 2 counts of solicitation for murder, suggesting a more sinister motive behind Backley's demise. However, as the case made it to court, Blake was eventually acquitted, but that did nothing to still the thoughts and the speculations that Blake was behind his wife's demise. On top of that, there were many signs that pointed to it. Blake maintained a low profile after his acquittal and filing for bankruptcy, with debts of $3 million for unpaid legal fees as well as state and federal taxes. 45. On April 9, 2010, the state of California filed a tax lien against Blake for $1,110,878 in unpaid back taxes. On July 16, 2012, Blake was interviewed on CNN's Piers Morgan Tonight. When asked about the night of Backley's murder, Blake became defensive and angry, stating he resented Morgan's questioning and felt he was being interrogated. Morgan responded he was only asking questions that he felt people were eager to have answered. In January 2019, Blake was interviewed by 2020ths. Initially, he seemed to decline the interview and instead delegated it to a friend, but then began to participate, discussing the murder and the behavior of the police officers who dealt with him, the culture of Hollywood, and its reaction to the events. The speculations persisted and got so bad even after his own demise. Blake passed on from heart disease in Los Angeles on March 9, 2023, at the age of 89. Comedian Jimmy Kimmel made a comment at the 95th Academy Awards on March 12, 2023, after the actor's recent demise. On the topic of whether or not Blake should be included in the annual In Memoriam montage, Kimmel stated, "Everybody please get out your phones, even at home it's time to vote. If you think Robert Blake should be part of the In Memoriam montage." Blake was not mentioned during the televised In Memoriam portion of the ceremony, and the stain of what he could have done all those years ago to his own wife stayed with him up until his demise. Olivia De Havilland, victim of studio slavery. During the heyday of Hollywood's studio system, actors found themselves ensnared in contracts that bound them to specific studios, leaving them with little autonomy over their careers. These agreements often dictated the roles they were given, relegating many to repetitive and one-dimensional characters. While some acquiesced to the status quo out of fear of losing their livelihoods, Olivia De Havilland dared to challenge the system. De Havilland, who had been signed by Warner Brothers in 1935, refused to be confined to the simplistic roles of the girl that the studio offered her. In her own words, she lamented how these roles were mere placeholders, devoid of depth or substance. Fueled by a desire for more meaningful work, De Havilland made the bold decision to turn down roles, a virtually unheard-of act of defiance in the 1930s and 1940s. Naturally, this decision did not sit well with the studio bosses, and Warner Bros. Promptly suspended her without pay, despite her being at the pinnacle of her career and still under 30 years old. Despite facing significant financial loss and risking her hard-earned fame and influence, De Havilland remained resolute. She recognized the injustice of a system that deprived actors of the right to refuse roles, and she was determined to fight back. Drawing upon the legal expertise of her attorney father, she took Warner Brothers to court. After years of legal battles, De Havilland emerged victorious. In 1943, the landmark Labor Code Section 2855, commonly referred to as the De Havilland Law or the 7-Year Rule, was enacted. This groundbreaking legislation placed limits on the duration of studio contracts, dismantling the oppressive grip of the studio system. While 7 years still represented a significant commitment, the rule marked a crucial step towards granting actors greater control over their careers. As De Havilland's biographer aptly summarized, it was a pivotal moment that contributed to the eventual demise of the studio's stranglehold on Hollywood talent. However, the victory of the De Havilland Law did not signify an end to the challenges faced by Hollywood stars. Despite the loosening of studio control, actors continued to grapple with issues of typecasting, unequal pay, and limited creative freedom. The road to autonomy in Hollywood remained fraught with obstacles, but De Havilland's courage and determination paved the way for future generations to assert their rights and demand fair treatment in the industry. Dalton Trumbo, blacklisted for no reason. Born in Montrose, Colorado, Dalton Trumbo was the son of Oris Bonham Trumbo and Maud Trumbo, née Tillery. In 1908, his family relocated to Grand Junction, Colorado, seeking better prospects. Trumbo's lineage is traced back to Jacob Trumbo, an immigrant of Swiss descent who settled in Virginia in 1736, marking a long history in America. However, despite this heritage, Trumbo's father, Oris, struggled to provide for the family, working various jobs such as shoe clerk and collection agent, but never managing to lift them out of poverty. Trumbo attended Grand Junction High School, where he demonstrated early literary talent by working as a cub reporter for the Grand Junction Daily Sentinel. Covering a range of beats, from courts to civic organizations, Trumbo honed his skills in journalism. His academic pursuits led him to the University of Colorado at Boulder in 1924 and 1925, where he continued his journalistic endeavors while contributing to the school's humor magazine, yearbook, and newspaper. As a member of the Delta Tau Delta International Fraternity, Trumbo immersed himself in campus life, further shaping his intellect and social connections. In 1924, tragedy struck when Oris Trumbo passed away shortly after relocating the family to California. Left to shoulder the responsibility of supporting his mother and siblings, Dalton embarked on a challenging journey of self-reliance. Working the night shift at a Los Angeles bakery for 9 years, Trumbo pursued higher education at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, in 1926, and later at the University of Southern California, USC, from 1928 to 1930. Despite his demanding schedule, Trumbo never abandoned his passion for writing, producing movie reviews, 88 short stories, and 6 novels during this period, although all faced rejection from publishers. Trumbo's early years were marked by hardship and perseverance, laying the foundation for his future resilience in the face of adversity. As a talented screenwriter, Trumbo enjoyed success in Hollywood during the 1940s and early 1950s, penning acclaimed scripts for films like Kitty Foyle and 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. However, his outspoken support for leftist causes and membership in the Communist Party drew the attention of anti-communist crusaders like Senator Joseph McCarthy. In 1947, Trumbo, along with 9 other screenwriters and directors, was called to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, regarding alleged communist infiltration in Hollywood. Refusing to cooperate with the committee's investigation, Trumbo was held in contempt of Congress and subsequently blacklisted by the major studios. The repercussions of Trumbo's refusal to testify were swift and severe. Overnight, he found himself ostracized from the industry he had once thrived in. Job offers dried up, and colleagues who had once been allies distanced themselves to avoid association with his tainted reputation. Despite being barred from working openly in Hollywood, Trumbo refused to be silenced. Under pseudonyms and with the help of sympathetic producers, he continued to write screenplays, including the Oscar-winning Roman Holiday, 1953, which he penned under the alias Samuel Jackson. Trumbo's defiance in the face of persecution became a symbol of resistance against the oppressive forces of McCarthyism. His courageous stand challenged the very foundations of the blacklist and inspired others to question the validity of the anti-communist hysteria sweeping the nation. In 1960, Trumbo's contribution to Exodus, a blockbuster film adaptation of Leon Uris's novel, marked a turning point in the fight against the blacklist. Breaking with tradition, both the film's director and its star openly credited Trumbo for his work on the screenplay, effectively breaking the taboo surrounding blacklisted writers. Finally, in 1975, years after the blacklist had officially ended, Trumbo received long-overdue recognition for his talents when he was posthumously awarded an Academy Award for his screenplay for The Brave One, 1956, which he had written under a pseudonym. Trumbo's story serves as a poignant reminder of the human cost of political persecution and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. His unwavering commitment to his principles and his refusal to be silenced continue to inspire generations of artists and activists to stand up for their beliefs, even in the darkest of times.